The bullet that grazed Penelope Turner's shoulder as she stepped off the stagecoach in Salt Lake City, Utah territory, was not meant for her, but it changed her life forever nonetheless. The year was 1875, and she had traveled 2,000 miles from Boston to claim an inheritance she never wanted from an uncle she barely remembered, only to arrive in the middle of a shootout between two drunken miners arguing over a card game. As she pressed her gloved hand against the bleeding wound, watching her carefully packed traveling dress turn crimson, a tall man in dusty work clothes swept her off her feet and carried her away from the chaos with an efficiency that spoke of someone accustomed to emergencies. "Keep pressure on it," he commanded, his voice deep and steady as he kicked open the door to the nearest building, which happened to be the general store. "Sam, get the doctor. Now." Penelope wanted to protest that she was perfectly capable of walking, that she did not need this stranger's assistance, but the sharp pain radiating from her shoulder and the sudden weakness in her knees suggested otherwise. She found herself deposited onto a wooden counter while the proprietor rushed out into the street, hollering for medical help. "Thank you," she managed, finally getting a proper look at her rescuer. He was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of long days outdoors and eyes the color of creek water in summer, green with flecks of gold. A scar ran along his jawline, partially hidden by several days' worth of stubble. His hands, which had handled her with surprising gentleness, were calloused and strong. "Noah Harrison," he introduced himself, already pulling a clean handkerchief from his pocket to replace her blood-soaked glove. "Welcome to Salt Lake City, though I imagine you were hoping for a quieter greeting." "Penelope Turner," she replied, wincing as he applied pressure to the wound. "And yes, somewhat quieter would have been preferable." The doctor arrived within minutes, an elderly man with spectacles and steady hands who examined her shoulder with practiced efficiency. "You are lucky, Miss Turner. The bullet barely grazed you. Clean it well, keep it bandaged, and you will have nothing worse than a scar to remember your arrival by." As the doctor worked, Noah Harrison remained nearby, and Penelope found herself acutely aware of his presence. She was not accustomed to such awareness. At 24, she had received 7 marriage proposals from suitable Boston gentlemen, and she had refused every one of them. Her closest friend, Margaret, had called her heartless. Her mother had wept and declared her impossibly stubborn. But Penelope knew the truth was simpler and sadder. She simply did not know how to love the way others seemed to. She could admire a man's intelligence, appreciate his humor, respect his character, but that spark everyone spoke of, that overwhelming feeling that made otherwise sensible women abandon propriety and reason, had never ignited within her. She had begun to believe herself incapable of such emotion, that perhaps she was constructed differently than other women, missing some essential component that allowed for romantic attachment. "Where are you staying?" Noah asked after the doctor had finished and departed, payment tucked into his vest pocket. "I have the address of my uncle's property," Penelope said, fumbling in her small bag with her uninjured arm. "Vernon Turner. He passed 3 months ago and left me his land." Noah's expression shifted, something complicated passing across his features. "Vernon Turner was your uncle." "Yes, did you know him?" Everyone knew Vernon. "He owned the property adjacent to mine about 10 miles north of town. Good man, kept to himself mostly." Noah paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "The house has been empty since he died. It will need work before it is habitable." Penelope felt her carefully constructed plans crumbling. She had assumed her uncle's property would provide immediate shelter while she determined what to do with her unexpected inheritance. The idea of staying in a hotel, alone and injured in a strange town, made her throat tighten with anxiety she refused to show. "I see," she said, keeping her voice level. "Then I suppose I shall find accommodations in town until I can assess the situation." "The hotel is full," Noah said bluntly. "Mining convention. Every room in Salt Lake City is occupied for the next 2 weeks." He seemed to wrestle with himself for a moment before continuing. "My ranch has a guest room. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, would be there for propriety. You could stay until you are healed and we can get your uncle's house in order." Every instinct Penelope had developed in Boston screamed that accepting such an offer from a stranger was improper, potentially scandalous, and entirely inappropriate. But Boston was 2,000 miles away, and she was bleeding, exhausted, and apparently without alternatives. "I would not want to impose," she began. "You would be doing me a favor," Noah interrupted. "Vernon was a good neighbor. Helping his niece is the least I can do." Something in his tone suggested this was not entirely true, that there was some debt or obligation he felt toward her uncle, but Penelope was too tired to investigate further. "Then I accept, with gratitude," she said. Noah's ranch was indeed 10 miles north of Salt Lake City, accessed by a road that wound through scrubland dotted with sagebrush and juniper. Penelope sat beside him in the wagon, her trunk secured in the back, watching the landscape transform as they climbed into the foothills. She had expected the west to be nothing but desert, but the Wasatch Mountains rose dramatically to the east, their peaks still crowned with snow despite the July heat. "It is beautiful," she said, surprising herself with the admission. Noah glanced at her, something softening in his expression. "It grows on you. When I first came here from Ohio, I thought I would die from the emptiness of it. Now I cannot imagine living anywhere else." "What brought you here? The war," he said simply. "Afterward I needed space, silence. The West offered both." He did not elaborate, and Penelope sensed the weight of memories he carried, familiar to anyone who had lived through those bloody years. The Harrison Ranch appeared as they crested a hill, a sprawling operation that spoke of years of hard work and careful management. The main house was built of wood and stone, practical but well-maintained, with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Beyond it stood a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals where horses moved like poetry against the sunset sky. Mrs. Chen emerged from the house as they approached, a small woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She was Chinese, which surprised Penelope, though she tried not to show it. Boston society had very particular ideas about who belonged in which roles, but clearly the West operated by different rules. "You brought home an injured woman," Mrs. Chen observed in perfect English, her tone suggesting this was both expected and exasperating. "I will prepare the guest room and get hot water for cleaning that wound properly." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen," Noah said, helping Penelope down from the wagon with careful attention to her injured shoulder. "This is Miss Penelope Turner, Vernon's niece from Boston." Mrs. Chen's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Vernon spoke of you, said you were the only family member with any sense." She turned and headed back into the house, calling over her shoulder, "Bring her in before she faints. Boston ladies are not built for this climate." Penelope wanted to protest that she was perfectly sturdy, but the world had developed an unfortunate tendency to tilt, so she allowed Noah to guide her inside. The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, furnished with pieces that looked handmade but sturdy, everything clean and orderly. Mrs. Chen led them to a room at the back of the house, small but pleasant, with a window overlooking the corrals and mountains beyond. "Rest," Noah said firmly. "Mrs. Chen will bring you food. Tomorrow we can discuss what needs to be done with Vernon's property." After he left, Mrs. Chen helped Penelope out of her ruined traveling dress and into a clean nightgown someone had left in the room, then rebandaged her shoulder with the efficiency of someone who had tended many injuries. "How long have you worked for Mr. Harrison?" Penelope asked, partly out of curiosity and partly to distract herself from the pain. 7 years, Mrs. Chen replied, "since he bought this ranch. My husband and I came west with the railroad. He died in an accident and Noah offered me work when no one else would." She met Penelope's eyes directly. "He is a good man, even if he thinks he is not." That cryptic statement lingered in Penelope's mind as she ate the soup Mrs. Chen brought and finally allowed herself to sleep, exhausted by travel and trauma. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of horses in the corral below. For a moment, she forgot where she was, expecting to see her familiar Boston bedroom, but the events of the previous day returned with the throbbing in her shoulder. Rising carefully, she found that someone had cleaned and mended her traveling dress as best as possible, though the bloodstain remained as a shadow. She dressed herself one-handed, frustrated by her limitations, and made her way toward the front of the house by following the smell of coffee. Noah sat at the kitchen table with Mrs. Chen, reviewing what appeared to be account books. He looked up when Penelope entered, surprise crossing his face. "You should be resting," he said, standing automatically. "I have been resting," Penelope replied. "Now I need to be useful." "Tell me about my uncle's property. What condition is it in?" Noah exchanged a glance with Mrs. Chen before gesturing for Penelope to sit. He poured her coffee without asking, then settled back into his chair. "Vernon's house needs work," he said bluntly. "The roof leaks, several windows are broken, and animals have gotten into the kitchen. But the structure is sound. With some effort, it could be comfortable. And the land, 200 acres, most of it good grazing land. Vernon ran cattle, had a small herd that I have been tending since he died, keeping them with my own. Legally they are yours now, about 40 head." Penelope absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with her expectations. She had assumed she would sell the property quickly and return to Boston, but she was beginning to realize that land in the Utah Territory was not as easily liquidated as Boston real estate. "What would you advise?" she asked. Noah looked genuinely surprised by the question. "You want my advice? You know this land and its value. I know nothing about ranching or the West. It would be foolish not to seek counsel from someone with experience." He studied her for a long moment, as if reassessing his initial impression. "If you want to sell, it will take time to find the right buyer, someone who will pay fair value. If you want to keep it, you will need help getting the house habitable and learning how to manage cattle. Vernon made a decent living, enough to support one person comfortably." "Could I hire someone to manage it?" "You could," Noah said carefully, "but finding someone trustworthy would be difficult. Many would see a Boston woman alone as an easy mark." The unspoken suggestion hung in the air between them. Penelope recognized the offer he was not quite making, the assistance he was prepared to provide, and she found herself considering it despite every rule of propriety she had been raised to observe. "I need to see it," she decided. "Before I make any decisions, I should see what my uncle left me." "I will take you this afternoon," Noah agreed. "Your shoulder needs another day of rest first." Those hours passed in a strange domestic tableau that Penelope found both unsettling and oddly comfortable. She sat on the porch with mending that Mrs. Chen provided, claiming it was light work suitable for an invalid, though Penelope suspected it was a test of her practical skills. Noah worked with his horses in the corral, breaking a young mare to saddle with patience and gentle persistence, that Penelope found herself watching far more than was necessary. He moved with an economy of motion she found fascinating, never wasting energy, always purposeful. When the mare spooked at a shadow, he did not force her or show frustration, but instead stepped back and waited, giving her space to calm before trying again. Penelope realized she was witnessing his teaching style, his method of communication with creatures who could not speak his language but could learn to trust him. "He is good with broken things," Mrs. Chen said quietly, appearing beside Penelope with fresh lemonade. "Animals, people. He sees the fear underneath and works with it instead of against it." "You speak as if from experience," Penelope observed. Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. "When my husband died, I wanted to die too. Noah gave me work but also space. He never demanded I be anything other than what I was. That is a rare gift." That afternoon, true to his word, Noah helped Penelope into the wagon and drove her to her uncle's property. The house appeared as they rounded a bend, smaller than Noah's ranch house but built in a similar style, with good bones beneath the obvious neglect. Noah had not exaggerated the work needed. The porch sagged, windows gaped empty, and when they stepped inside, the smell of animals and abandonment was overwhelming. But Penelope could also see what it had been. A cozy home with a large fireplace, built-in shelves for books, and windows positioned to capture the mountain views. "Vernon built it himself," Noah said, watching her explore. "Took him 3 years, working between cattle drives and winter storms. He was proud of it." Penelope ran her fingers along the mantel, imagining her uncle, whom she barely remembered from one childhood visit, spending his evenings here alone. "Why did he leave it to me?" "He said you were the only one who ever asked him questions," Noah replied. "During that visit when you were young. The only one who wanted to know about his life instead of telling him what he should do with it." A memory surfaced, hazy with time. A tall man with kind eyes showing a curious little girl how to identify animal tracks in the dirt, praising her for her careful observations. She had been perhaps 8 years old, and Uncle Vernon had treated her like someone worth teaching. "I remember now," she said softly. "He taught me about the stars, different constellations than we could see in Boston. My mother scolded him for keeping me up past bedtime." "That sounds like Vernon," Noah said, and there was warmth in his voice that made Penelope look at him with new curiosity. "You cared for him," she observed. "He helped me when I first came here," Noah said. "I knew nothing about ranching, had bought this land on impulse after the war, thought I could learn as I went. I would have lost everything that first winter if Vernon had not taught me what I needed to know. He never asked why I came west or what I was running from, just showed me how to survive." They stood together in the dusty house, connected by shared grief for a man who had meant something different to each of them but had clearly touched both their lives. "I want to fix it," Penelope said suddenly. "I want to make it what he intended, what he deserved." Noah looked at her with something that might have been respect. "That will not be easy. You will have to learn things Boston did not teach you." "Then you will have to teach me," Penelope said, meeting his eyes directly, "if you are willing." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went beyond words. Noah nodded slowly. "I am willing." The work began the next morning, despite Mrs. Chen's protests that her shoulder needed more rest. Penelope insisted on helping. Noah set her to tasks that required one good arm, cataloging what was salvageable in the house, washing windows that were not broken, sweeping out years of accumulated dirt and debris. Noah brought 2 of his ranch hands to help with the heavier work. Tom was a weathered man in his 50s who spoke little but worked with steady determination. Felipe was younger, perhaps 25, with an easy smile and a talent for carpentry that proved invaluable when they began replacing broken boards. Penelope worked alongside them, learning by watching and doing. Noah proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to identify which wood was rotted beyond saving, how to measure and cut properly, how to drive a nail straight. He never showed impatience when she made mistakes, instead explaining what went wrong and how to correct it. "You are better at this than I expected," he admitted one afternoon, watching her successfully repair a section of porch railing. "Because I am from Boston?" Penelope asked, wiping sweat from her forehead and likely smearing dirt across it in the process. "Because you are a woman who has clearly never done manual labor before," Noah corrected. "But you learn quickly and you do not give up. Those are more important than experience." The compliment warmed her in a way she did not fully understand. She had received many compliments in Boston, on her appearance, her wit, her musical abilities, but none had felt as genuine as this simple acknowledgement of her perseverance. As days passed into weeks, Penelope's shoulder healed and her hands developed calluses. She learned to judge the weather by the color of the sky, to identify the plants that were safe to touch and those that would leave her itching for days, to move with awareness of snakes and other creatures that shared this harsh landscape. In the evenings, she returned to Noah's ranch house, too exhausted for anything but a simple meal before collapsing into bed. But there were moments on the porch before sleep claimed her, sitting with Noah as they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold, when she felt something stirring inside her that she had never experienced before. "Why did you never marry?" she asked one evening, the question emerging before she could consider whether it was too personal. Noah was silent for so long she thought he would not answer. "I was engaged once," he finally said. "Before the war. Sarah was her name. She waited for me for 3 years, wrote letters every week. When I came back, she took one look at what the war had made of me and knew I was not the same man she had agreed to marry. She was kind about it, but we both knew the truth. The boy she loved died at Shiloh, even if his body kept walking." The raw honesty in his words struck something deep in Penelope's chest. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I am not," Noah replied, surprising her. "She deserved someone who could give her a whole heart, not whatever pieces I had left. She married a shopkeeper in Ohio, has 4 children now. I heard she is happy." "And what about you? Are you happy?" Noah turned to look at her, his creek-water eyes catching the last light. "I am here," he said. "That is enough." But Penelope wondered if it truly was, if anyone could be content with mere existence rather than genuine happiness. She wondered if that was what she had been settling for in Boston, a life of comfortable emptiness that she had mistaken for peace. "I do not know how to love," she confessed, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I have been told I am cold, incapable of deep feeling. 7 men proposed marriage, and I could not say yes to any of them because I felt nothing. I admired them, respected some of them, but that overwhelming emotion everyone speaks of, I never felt it. I began to think something was wrong with me." Noah was quiet, but he did not look away. "Maybe you were waiting for the right teacher," he said softly. "What do you mean?" "Love is like breaking horses," he said. "Some people think it is about force, about bending another creature to your will, but that creates fear, not partnership. Real love is about patience, about learning another's language, about creating trust slowly until one day you realize you cannot imagine life without them." Penelope felt her heart beating too fast, her breath catching in her throat. "You speak as if from experience." "I am beginning to," Noah said, and the way he looked at her made something inside her chest crack open, letting in light she had not known she was blocking. They sat in silence as stars emerged overhead, the same stars her uncle had taught her to identify so many years ago. Penelope realized that she was not afraid of what she was feeling, this slow burn that was so different from the dramatic passion she had expected. This was something deeper, built on shared work and honest conversation, on respect and growing trust. Over the following weeks, as her uncle's house slowly transformed from ruin to home, Penelope found herself learning more than just practical skills. She was learning to read the subtle shifts in Noah's expression, to understand what his silences meant, to recognize the rare smile that transformed his weathered face into something beautiful. She was learning, she realized, the language of hearts. One afternoon, as they worked together replacing shingles on the roof, Noah suddenly stopped and looked at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "What?" she asked. "I have been trying not to do this," he said. "Trying to maintain proper distance, to be the gentleman your uncle would have wanted helping his niece. But I am failing." "Failing how?" "I am falling in love with you, Penelope Turner," he said bluntly. "And I do not know if that is welcome or if I am making a fool of myself." Penelope set down the hammer she had been holding, her hands trembling slightly. This was the moment she had feared all her life, when someone would declare feelings she could not return, and she would have to watch hope die in their eyes. But as she looked at Noah, dusty and sun-worn and heartbreakingly sincere, she realized something had changed. Her heart was pounding, her palms sweating, and she wanted nothing more than to close the distance between them. "I think," she said carefully, "that I am falling in love with you too. Only I have no experience with it, so I am not entirely certain that is what this feeling is." Noah's face broke into a smile she had never seen before, full of joy and relief and something that looked like wonder. "What does it feel like?" "Like I cannot quite catch my breath when you are near," Penelope admitted. "Like the world is more vivid, more real. Like I want to know everything about you and tell you everything about me. Like the thought of leaving here, of not seeing you every day, is physically painful." "That is love," Noah confirmed, moving closer to her on the roof. "Or at least the beginning of it." "Then teach me the rest," Penelope said. And when he cupped her face gently in his calloused hands and kissed her, she felt her heart crack fully open, flooding her with emotion so intense it was almost frightening. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, giving her space to pull away if she wanted. But Penelope did not want distance. She wanted more of this feeling, this connection that made her feel fully alive for the first time in her life. She kissed him back with growing confidence, learning the taste and texture of him, the way he breathed her name against her lips like a prayer. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Noah rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably get off this roof before we fall," he said practically, making her laugh. They climbed down carefully, but once on solid ground, Noah pulled her close again, holding her as if she were precious and fragile and strong all at once. "I do not know what happens next," Penelope admitted. "I have no plan, no clear path forward." "We figure it out together," Noah said simply. "That is what love is, not having all the answers but being willing to search for them with someone else." Over the following days, as their relationship shifted from friendly cooperation to acknowledged courtship, Penelope discovered new dimensions to the emotions she had thought herself incapable of feeling. She learned that love was not just the breathless excitement of stolen kisses in the barn, or the way her skin tingled when Noah's hand brushed hers while working. It was also the quiet comfort of sitting together in companionable silence, the satisfaction of accomplishing difficult tasks side by side, the security of knowing someone truly saw her and valued what they found. Mrs. Chen observed these developments with knowing eyes and occasional comments about proper behavior. But Penelope noticed that she always managed to need something from town or the far pasture whenever Noah and Penelope were working together, creating opportunities for private conversation. "She likes you," Noah observed one day, watching his housekeeper drive off toward Salt Lake City with a suspicious number of errands to run. "She wants you to be happy," Penelope corrected. "There is a difference." "Both can be true," Noah pointed out, pulling her into his arms now that they were alone. "I am happy, incidentally, happier than I have been in years, maybe ever." Penelope tilted her face up to his, marveling at how natural this felt, how right. "So am I. It terrifies me slightly how much I feel. I spent so long believing myself incapable of this." "You were not incapable," Noah said, kissing her forehead gently. "You were waiting. There is a difference." The house was nearly finished by late September. The roof no longer leaked. The windows were whole and clean. The floors had been repaired and polished. Penelope had sewn curtains from fabric Noah had helped her select in town, and Felipe had built new furniture to replace the pieces that were beyond saving. Standing in the main room, looking at what they had accomplished together, Penelope felt a rush of pride. This was hers, truly hers in a way nothing in Boston had ever been. She had built this with her own hands, learned skills she had never imagined needing, transformed ruin into home. "What will you do now?" Noah asked quietly, coming to stand beside her. It was the question they had been avoiding, the future looming like a storm on the horizon. The house was finished. Penelope could theoretically live here, manage her uncle's cattle with Noah's guidance, build a life in the Utah Territory. Or she could sell everything and return to Boston, to the life she had left behind. But that life felt impossibly distant now, like something that had happened to a different person. The woman who had stepped off that stage coach 2 months ago, bleeding and lost and certain she could not love, no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, more capable, more fully alive. "I want to stay," Penelope said, "but I do not want to live here alone." Noah turned to face her fully, hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. "What are you saying?" Penelope took a deep breath, gathering her courage. In Boston, women did not propose marriage. They waited, hoped, manipulated circumstances to encourage proposals from suitable gentlemen. But she was not in Boston, and Noah had taught her that sometimes the bravest thing was direct honesty. "I am saying that I love you, Noah Harrison. I am saying that I want to build a life with you, combine our ranches, share our work and our days. I am saying that if you were to ask me to marry you, my answer would be yes." For a moment, Noah simply stared at her, and Penelope felt a flutter of fear that she had misread everything, that she had been too bold, too presumptuous. But then he laughed, a sound of pure joy, and swept her into his arms. "Penelope Turner," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life teaching you the language of hearts and learning whatever languages you wish to teach me in return?" "Yes," Penelope said, and then again, louder, "Yes." They were married 6 weeks later in Salt Lake City, in a small ceremony attended by Mrs. Chen, Tom, Felipe, and a handful of neighbors who had become friends. Penelope wore a simple dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, and Noah wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but handsome. The minister was a kind man who smiled when Penelope and Noah wrote their own vows, promising to be partners in work and life, to teach and learn from each other, to build something lasting together. When Noah kissed her as his wife, Penelope felt the last of her old fears dissolve, replaced by certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. They held a small celebration at the ranch afterward, with food Mrs. Chen had been secretly preparing for days and music provided by Felipe on a battered guitar. As the sun set and the other guests departed, Penelope and Noah stood together on the porch of what was now their shared home, looking out at their combined land stretching toward the mountains. "What are you thinking?" Noah asked, his arm around her waist. "That I came west expecting nothing and found everything," Penelope said. "That I am grateful for drunk miners with poor aim and stage coaches that arrive in the middle of gunfights." Noah laughed. "When you put it that way, our love story sounds slightly absurd." "The best stories often are," Penelope replied, turning in his arms to face him. "Now take me inside and teach me more about this language of hearts." Noah needed no further encouragement. He lifted her easily despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of walking, and carried her over the threshold of their bedroom, kicking the door closed behind them with his boot heel. The night that followed was a revelation, another language Penelope learned with Noah as her patient teacher. She discovered that physical love was not the mechanical duty Boston matrons whispered about in disapproving tones, but another form of communication, another way to express the overwhelming emotion that filled her whenever she looked at her husband. Noah was gentle and thorough, taking time to learn what pleased her, encouraging her to explore what pleased him, creating a new kind of partnership in the intimacy they shared. Penelope found herself laughing and gasping and eventually crying from the sheer intensity of feeling, of being so completely known and accepted and cherished. "I love you," she whispered afterward, lying in his arms as moonlight streamed through their window. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." "Good fear or bad fear?" Noah asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Good fear," Penelope decided. "The kind that comes from having something precious that you never want to lose." "You will not lose me," Noah promised. "I am not going anywhere." The months that followed were not without challenges. Combining two ranches meant learning new systems, negotiating decisions, occasionally arguing about the best approach to various problems. Penelope discovered that Noah could be stubborn about certain things, particularly anything involving the safety of his horses. Noah learned that Penelope had strong opinions about financial planning and was not shy about expressing them. But they also learned how to fight fairly, how to listen to each other's concerns, how to compromise without either person feeling diminished. Mrs. Chen watched these negotiations with satisfaction, occasionally offering pointed observations about communication that usually proved helpful. Winter came early that year, snow falling in November and transforming the ranch into something from a fairy tale. Penelope learned to manage livestock in freezing temperatures, to break ice on water troughs, to recognize the signs of impending storms. She also learned the pleasure of cold evenings spent by the fire with Noah, reading aloud from books while he mended tack, the domestic peace that came from choosing this life together. In February, Penelope began feeling unwell in the mornings. Mrs. Chen noticed before she did, appearing one morning with ginger tea and a knowing look. "How far along are you?" the housekeeper asked bluntly. Penelope blinked in surprise, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. "I do not know. I had not realized. Are you certain?" "I have seen enough pregnant women to recognize the signs," Mrs. Chen said. "You should tell Noah." Penelope found him in the barn, examining a mare who was due to foal soon. She watched him for a moment, this man she loved, trying to imagine him as a father. The image came easily. Noah teaching a child to ride, to identify stars, to treat all creatures with respect. "Noah," she said, and something in her voice made him turn immediately, concern crossing his face. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Penelope assured him quickly. Quite the opposite. I am with child. For a moment, Noah simply stood frozen, processing her words. Then he crossed the barn in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Noah said, his voice rough with emotion. He pulled back enough to look at her face, and she saw tears in his eyes. "I never thought I would have this. A family, a future. You have given me everything, Penelope." "We have given it to each other," she corrected, and kissed him. Their son was born in early October, a difficult birth that left Penelope exhausted but fiercely proud. Noah stayed with her throughout, holding her hand and offering encouragement, ignoring the doctor's suggestions that he wait elsewhere like a proper gentleman. They named him Vernon Thomas Harrison, after Penelope's uncle and Noah's most loyal ranch hand. He was a sturdy baby with his father's green eyes and his mother's determined expression. And from the moment Penelope held him, she understood a new dimension of love entirely. Watching Noah with their son was a revelation. The man who had been so gentle with broken horses and injured women showed the same patience and care with their infant, walking the floor at night when Vernon fussed, changing nappies without complaint, speaking to the baby as if he could understand every word. "You are a natural father," Penelope observed one afternoon, watching Noah show their 6-month-old son how to pat the ranch dog gently. "I had good teachers," Noah said, glancing up at her with the smile she loved. "Your uncle showed me how to be patient. You showed me how to love without fear." Vernon just has to combine the lessons. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic with a baby, but also richer. Penelope managed the ranch's finances and correspondence while caring for Vernon, while Noah handled the physical labor with help from Tom and Felipe. Mrs. Chen appointed herself chief guardian of the baby, spoiling him shamelessly while pretending to be stern. 2 years later, Penelope gave birth to their daughter, Elizabeth, named after Noah's mother. She was smaller than Vernon had been but no less determined, with dark hair and a temperament that suggested she would not be easily managed. "We are in trouble with this one," Noah observed, watching his 3-month-old daughter grip his finger with surprising strength. "Good," Penelope said. "The world needs strong women." As the children grew, the ranch prospered. Word spread about the quality of Noah's horses, and buyers began traveling from as far as California to purchase his carefully trained stock. Penelope's management expanded their cattle operation, and she began investing in property in Salt Lake City that proved surprisingly profitable. They added rooms to the house to accommodate their growing family, built a larger barn to house the increased livestock, hired additional help during busy seasons. The ranch that Noah had started alone and nearly lost became a thriving enterprise, evidence of what could be accomplished through partnership and shared vision. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Noah took Penelope riding up into the mountains, to a meadow he had discovered years ago when he first came west. It was beautiful and isolated, filled with wildflowers and surrounded by peaks that seemed to touch the sky. "I used to come here when I was trying to decide whether to keep going or give up," Noah said, helping Penelope down from her horse. "I would sit here and try to imagine a future worth fighting for." "Did you find one?" Penelope asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Eventually," Noah said, pulling her close. "But I could never picture the details clearly until you arrived. You made everything real, Penelope. You gave me a reason to build instead of just survive." "You did the same for me," Penelope said. "I was so lost in Boston, trying to force myself to feel things I thought I was supposed to feel. You taught me that love is not about following rules or meeting expectations. It is about finding someone who speaks your language and being willing to learn theirs. They stood together in that meadow, holding each other as they had on that porch so many years ago, but everything was different now. They were not tentative and uncertain but solid, tested by years of partnership and proven by the life they had built. "Thank you," Penelope said softly. "For what?" "For being my teacher in the language of hearts," she said. "For being patient while I learned, for loving me when I did not know how to love myself." Noah kissed her, gentle and thorough, and Penelope felt the same rush of emotion she had experienced in her uncle's ruined house when Noah first said he was falling in love with her. But it was deeper now, richer, seasoned by time and experience, and the everyday choice to keep choosing each other. They rode back to the ranch as the sun set, and Penelope felt contentment settle over her like a warm blanket. Her life had not turned out anything like she had planned in Boston, but it was so much better than anything she could have imagined. Vernon and Elizabeth rushed to greet them when they arrived, full of stories about their day with Mrs. Chen. Penelope scooped up Elizabeth while Noah lifted Vernon onto his shoulders, and they walked together into their home, a family built on love and patience and the willingness to learn new languages. Years continued to pass, bringing both joys and challenges. There was a drought that tested their resources and a harsh winter that killed several cattle. There was the scare when Vernon fell from a horse and broke his arm, and the fever that nearly took Elizabeth when she was 7. There were arguments about money and expansion, and how to discipline the children, moments when Penelope and Noah had to remember their early lessons about communication and compromise. But there were also moments of transcendent joy. Vernon's first successful horse training at age 12, proving he had inherited his father's gift. Elizabeth's determination to learn ranching as well as any boy, proving she had inherited her mother's stubborn independence. The summer evening when their children performed a play they had written, roping in Mrs. Chen and the ranch hands as unwilling audience members. When Penelope was 35, she gave birth to twins, Jacob and Grace, much to everyone's surprise, including the doctor. Noah handled the chaos with characteristic calm, though Penelope caught him looking slightly overwhelmed when both babies cried simultaneously. "We have expanded our operation significantly," he observed Riley at 3 in the morning, walking the floor with Jacob while Penelope nursed Grace. "Are you complaining?" Penelope asked, too tired to properly manage a smile. "Never," Noah assured her. "I am merely noting that our capacity for growth continues to surprise me." Vernon and Elizabeth adapted to their new siblings with varying degrees of enthusiasm. At 14, Vernon was patient and helpful, treating the babies like fascinating small animals to be carefully tended. 12-year-old Elizabeth was less impressed with the disruption to household routine, but eventually conceded that the twins were acceptable additions to the family. Mrs. Chen, now in her 60s but still formidable, announced that this was absolutely the last time she was helping with infants, and then proceeded to spoil Jacob and Grace as thoroughly as she had their older siblings. The ranch continued to grow. Noah's reputation as a horse trainer spread throughout the Western Territories, and Penelope's business acumen transformed their operation into one of the most successful in the region. They employed a dozen people year-round now, including 2 families who lived in cottages they had built on the property. But success did not change the fundamental partnership at the heart of their enterprise. Noah and Penelope still made major decisions together, still worked side by side when time allowed, still found moments to steal away from responsibility and remember why they had chosen this life together. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Penelope woke to find Noah already dressed, looking at her with the expression that still made her heart race after all these years. "I have something to show you," he said mysteriously. He led her outside, where their 4 children waited with barely contained excitement. Vernon, now 21 and nearly as tall as his father, held the reins of 2 horses. Elizabeth, 19 and beautiful despite her tendency to dress practically, stood beside him grinning. The twins, now 8 and thinking themselves very grown up, bounced with anticipation. "What is this about?" Penelope asked, accepting Noah's help mounting her horse despite the fact that she had been riding for 15 years and hardly needed assistance. "You will see," was all he would say. They rode as a family toward the property that had once been her Uncle Vernon's, the house where Penelope and Noah had first admitted their feelings for each other. But as they approached, Penelope saw changes that made her pull her horse to a stop in surprise. The house had been completely renovated, expanded to twice its original size with a wide porch and large windows. The land around it had been landscaped, and a new barn stood where there had been nothing but scrubland. "What did you do?" Penelope breathed. "Vernon is getting married," Noah explained, gesturing to their oldest son, who flushed slightly. "To Sarah Thompson. We thought they would need a home of their own, somewhere to start their life together. This seemed appropriate." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes, moved by the symmetry. The house where she had learned to love would now shelter her son as he began his own journey. "Sarah's father has that property to the east," Vernon said, moving his horse closer to his mother's. "Between his land, this house, and our ranch, we will have a good operation. I have been learning his cattle methods, combining them with father's horse training. Sarah is excited about the prospects." "She is a good woman," Elizabeth added. "Practical, not given to silly emotions or impractical expectations." Penelope caught Noah's eye, both of them recognizing their daughter's unconscious echo of how Penelope had once viewed herself. "All emotions are practical if they are genuine," Penelope said gently. "I once thought feeling deeply was a weakness. Your father taught me it was the greatest strength." Vernon's wedding to Sarah Thompson took place in early June, a large celebration that brought together neighboring ranchers and Salt Lake City society. Watching her son pledge his life to the woman he loved, Penelope felt the circle completing, the lessons learned and passed forward. Sarah was indeed practical, but Penelope also saw the way she looked at Vernon, the softness that crept into her expression when she thought no one was watching. She recognized that look, had seen it in her own mirror often enough. Love disguised as practicality, emotion dressed in sensible clothing. After the ceremony, as the celebration continued around them, Noah pulled Penelope onto the porch of Vernon and Sarah's new home, into the shadows where they could observe without being observed. "What are you thinking?" he asked, the question he had asked her 1,000 times over 15 years. "That I am grateful," Penelope said. "That I found you, that you were patient with me, that we built this together, that our children are finding their own paths. That I have lived more in these 15 years than in all the years before combined." "I am grateful too," Noah said, pulling her close. "You saved my life, Penelope. Not dramatically, not in some moment of crisis, but slowly, patiently, by teaching me that the war did not have to define my future. That I could build something beautiful from broken pieces." "We saved each other," Penelope corrected. "That is what love does. It does not rescue like some fairy tale it partners. It builds. It creates something neither person could have made alone." They stood together watching their children, their community, the life they had created, and Penelope felt complete. Not in the sense of lacking nothing, because life always held challenges and changes, but complete in knowing she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she belonged with. Elizabeth married 2 years later, choosing a young rancher named Michael Davies, who had the good sense to respect her intelligence and the courage to stand up to her stubbornness. They settled on land north of Salt Lake City, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to establish their own independence. The twins grew into their own distinct personalities. Jacob inherited his father's quiet steadiness and his gift with animals, while Grace showed her mother's head for business and her tendency to question traditional expectations. They were still young, only 10, but Penelope could already see the adults they would become. As Noah and Penelope entered their 40s, the ranch began transitioning to the next generation. Vernon took over more of the daily operations, bringing new ideas while respecting the foundation his parents had built. Noah focused on training the most difficult horses, the ones that required patience and expertise, while Penelope managed the business aspects she had always enjoyed. They traveled some, taking trips to San Francisco and Denver that would have been impossible with young children. But they always returned home, to the ranch and the mountains and the life they had chosen. One evening, sitting on their porch as they had done countless times before, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Noah took Penelope's hand. "I have been thinking," he said. "About what?" "About that day you arrived, bleeding and lost and certain you could not love," Noah said. "About how I almost did not offer you help, thinking I had nothing to give someone like you. About all the moments since where we could have made different choices. What is your point?" Penelope asked, though she suspected she knew. "That I would not change a single thing," Noah said simply. "Not the hard parts, not the scary parts, not even that first winter when we were both terrified we had made a terrible mistake getting married so quickly." Penelope laughed, remembering that winter, the arguments and tears and eventual understanding that had emerged from facing challenges together. "I would not change anything either. Every difficulty taught us something, made us stronger. I love you more now than I did when we married," Noah said. "Which I would not have thought possible then. But love is not static. It grows, changes, deepens if you tend it properly." "You would know," Penelope said softly. "You are the expert in the language of hearts." "We are both experts now," Noah corrected. "You learned to speak it, but you also taught me new dialects I never knew existed. Partnership, trust, shared vision. Those were languages I was still learning when you arrived." They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged, the same stars that had witnessed every stage of their journey together. Penelope thought about the woman she had been, so certain of her limitations, and marveled at how wrong she had been. She had not been incapable of love. She had simply been waiting for the right person and the right place and the right moment to discover what she was truly capable of feeling. Jacob and Grace appeared on the porch, now 16 and grown tall, to say good night. Grace kissed her mother's cheek, while Jacob clasped his father's shoulder, and Penelope felt a rush of affection for these young people who carried pieces of both parents forward into the next generation. After the twins retired, Mrs. Chen emerged from the house with coffee, settling into her customary chair with a satisfied sigh. She was 70 now, her hair completely white, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "You two are disgustingly happy," she observed. 20 years of marriage and you still look at each other like newlyweds." "Is that a criticism?" Noah asked, amusement in his voice. "An observation," Mrs. Chen corrected, "and perhaps a small amount of pride that I helped it happen." "You absolutely helped it happen," Penelope agreed. "Your strategic absences when we needed privacy, your wise counsel when we needed guidance, your care for our children. We could not have built this life without you." Mrs. Chen waved away the gratitude with characteristic briskness, but Penelope saw the pleasure in her expression. They sat together, the three of them who had formed the foundation of this family, and watched the night deepen over the ranch. Penelope thought about everything this place had witnessed. First kisses and difficult births, children learning to walk and ride, arguments and reconciliations, grief when Tom passed away and joy when Vernon's first child was born. This was her legacy, not wealth or property but relationships built with care, love expressed through daily choices, a family created not just by blood but by commitment and effort. As she and Noah finally retired for the night, Penelope paused at their bedroom window, looking out at the land they had worked together, the buildings they had constructed, the life they had built. "No regrets?" Noah asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "Not a single one," Penelope said, leaning back against his solid warmth. "I came west expecting nothing and found everything. I thought I could not love and discovered I simply had not met you yet." "Best shooting accident in history," Noah said, making her laugh. "Indeed," Penelope agreed, turning in his arms to face him. "Thank you for teaching me the language of hearts. Thank you for being patient while I learned. Thank you for 20 years of partnership and love and building something beautiful together." "Thank you for being willing to learn," Noah replied. "Thank you for choosing this life, for choosing me, for creating a family I never thought I deserved." They kissed, gentle and familiar and still capable of making Penelope's heart race after all these years. Love, she had learned, was not a single overwhelming moment but thousands of small moments accumulated over time, each one adding depth and richness to the whole. As they settled into bed, Penelope felt sleep pulling her under, but she fought it for a moment longer, wanting to preserve this feeling of absolute contentment, of being exactly where she belonged with exactly who she belonged with. The ranch was quiet around them, the children sleeping in their rooms, the horses settled in the barn, the mountains standing eternal guard over the valley. Everything Penelope had thought impossible 20 years ago had become her daily reality. Passionate love, true partnership, a family built on respect and affection, a life of purpose and meaning. She had learned to speak the language of hearts, and in doing so, she had discovered her own heart was far more capable than she had ever imagined. The years continued their steady march forward, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Vernon and Sarah had 3 children, expanding the Harrison family and bringing new energy to the ranch. Elizabeth and Michael also started their family, and suddenly, Penelope found herself a grandmother, a role she embraced with enthusiasm that would have shocked her younger self. Jacob, true to his quiet nature, surprised everyone by announcing at 21 that he wanted to study veterinary medicine in San Francisco. It was a decision that required courage and support, and Noah and Penelope gave both freely, understanding that the language of hearts sometimes meant letting go. Grace, at 19, showed no interest in marriage despite several suitable prospects. Instead, she focused on expanding the business side of the ranch, making connections in Salt Lake City, and beyond that proved invaluable. She was her mother's daughter in every way that mattered, independent and determined and uninterested in conforming to others' expectations. Penelope, now in her late 40s, sometimes caught herself marveling at the life she had built. The scared, confused woman who had stepped off that stagecoach so many years ago seemed like a stranger, someone she had known in passing but never truly understood. One afternoon, sorting through old papers in preparation for Vernon taking over more of the business, she found the letters her mother had sent from Boston in those early years. Pleas for her to return, warnings about the unsuitability of Western life, predictions of disaster and unhappiness. Penelope had not answered most of them, too hurt by her mother's lack of faith to formulate appropriate responses. Eventually, the letters had stopped coming, replaced by occasional brief notes acknowledging major events like births or anniversaries with cool formality. "What are you rating?" Noah asked, finding her in the study with papers scattered around her. "Letters from my mother," Penelope said. "Reminders of who I was supposed to be according to Boston society." Noah settled into the chair across from her, his hair now liberally streaked with gray, but his eyes still the same creek water green that made her heart skip. "Do you ever regret not following that path?" "Never," Penelope said firmly. "I regret that my mother could not understand my choices, that she chose judgment over acceptance. But I do not regret a single decision I made after stepping off that stagecoach. Even getting shot," Noah teased. "Especially getting shot," Penelope replied, smiling. "It brought you into my life." Everything else followed from that moment. She gathered the old letters and carried them to the fireplace, feeding them one by one into the flames. They were part of her history but not her present, and she no longer needed their weight. Noah watched her burn the past, understanding the symbolism in the gesture. When the last letter curled into ash, he stood and pulled her into his arms. "I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you for 25 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left. That is the only truth that matters." Penelope kissed him, pouring a quarter-century of love and partnership into the gesture, speaking volumes in the language they had developed together. Their 30th anniversary arrived with little fanfare, both of them preferring quiet celebration to grand gestures. Vernon and Sarah hosted a family dinner, and Penelope found herself surrounded by children and grandchildren, by the family they had created through love and patience and commitment. Looking around the table, seeing the faces that carried pieces of her and Noah forward into the future, Penelope felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. This was her legacy, not property or wealth but people, relationships built with care, love expressed through daily choices. After dinner, Noah took her riding to the meadow in the mountains where they had gone on their 5th anniversary, the place he used to visit when deciding whether to keep fighting or give up. The meadow was exactly as Penelope remembered, filled with wildflowers and surrounded by peaks that seemed to touch the sky. They dismounted and stood together in the fading light, holding hands and watching the sunset paint everything in shades of gold. "I never imagined this," Noah said quietly. "When I used to come here alone, trying to picture a future worth fighting for, I could not have imagined anything as good as what we built." "We imagined it together," Penelope said. "That is the secret, I think. Neither of us could have created this alone. It took both of us, working together, learning each other's languages." "You changed my life," Noah said, turning to face her fully. "You took a broken man who thought he had nothing left to offer and showed him he could still build something beautiful." "You changed mine," Penelope replied. "You took a woman who thought she was incapable of love and taught her the language of hearts. Everything I am now, everything I have accomplished, started with you believing in me when I could not believe in myself." They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, 30 years of love and partnership and commitment flowing between them. Penelope felt tears on her cheeks, but could not say if they were hers or Noah's or both. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in memories and gratitude. When they arrived, the house was lit and welcoming, filled with the sounds of their family preparing for bed. Grandchildren kissed them goodnight, Vernon and Sarah made plans for the next day's work, and Mrs. Chen fussed over whether they had dressed warmly enough for evening riding. It was ordinary and perfect, exactly what Penelope had never known she wanted. As they lay in bed that night, Noah holding her close in the darkness, Penelope thought about the journey that had brought them here. The gunshot that had seemed like disaster but had been the beginning of everything. The work of rebuilding her uncle's house that had taught her she was stronger than she knew. The moment Noah had confessed his love, and she had discovered her own capacity for feeling. Every difficulty, every challenge, every moment of doubt had been necessary, building blocks in the foundation of the life they had created. And she would not change a single one, because they had all led to this, lying in the arms of the man she loved, surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Noah replied, his voice heavy with sleep but full of affection. Penelope closed her eyes and let sleep claim her, content in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys, and she would face them all with Noah beside her, speaking the language of hearts they had learned together. The years grew shorter as they grew older, time seeming to accelerate as their children became adults and their grandchildren grew. Jacob returned from San Francisco with his veterinary degree and opened a practice in Salt Lake City, splitting his time between town and the ranch. Grace eventually married a businessman she met through her work, someone who respected her independence and shared her vision for growth and innovation. Noah's hair turned completely white and his movements slowed, but his hands remained steady and his way with horses unchanged. Penelope's dark hair also silvered, and she needed spectacles for reading, but her mind stayed sharp and her management of the ranch finances as skilled as ever. They adjusted to the changes age brought, learning new ways to express love as their bodies became less cooperative. The passion of their youth evolved into something deeper, more profound, built on decades of shared experience and unwavering commitment. On their 40th anniversary, they woke in the same bed they had shared for 4 decades, in the house they had built together, surrounded by the life they had created. "How do you feel?" Penelope asked, studying Noah's lined face, still beautiful to her despite the ravages of time. "Grateful," Noah said simply. "Tired, sore in joints I did not know I had, but overwhelmingly grateful for every moment." They spent the day quietly, visiting with family who stopped by with gifts and well wishes, accepting congratulations from neighbors and friends. In the evening, just the two of them sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sunset paint the mountains in familiar shades of gold and crimson. 40 years, Penelope mused. It seems impossible and also like no time at all. "I know what you mean," Noah agreed. "I can barely remember life before you, and yet I remember every important moment with perfect clarity." "What was your favorite?" Penelope asked. Noah was quiet for a long moment, considering. "The day Vernon was born," he finally said. "Holding our son for the first time, seeing you exhausted and proud and more beautiful than ever. That was the moment I truly understood what we had created together, not just a marriage but a legacy." "Mine was when you first said you were falling in love with me," Penelope admitted. "On that roof, covered in dust and sweat, looking at me like I was precious. That was when I realized I could feel all the things I thought I was incapable of feeling." They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their entire journey together. Penelope reached for Noah's hand, finding it waiting for hers, and they sat connected as they had been for 40 years. Mrs. Chen had passed away 5 years earlier, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83. Her loss had left a hole in their lives, but also gratitude for the decades of friendship and support she had provided. In her will, she had left a letter thanking them for giving her a home when she had nowhere else to go, for treating her like family, for allowing her to be part of something beautiful. Penelope thought of her often, wished she could share one more cup of coffee and listen to one more sharp observation about life and love, and the importance of communicating clearly. As the evening deepened, Vernon appeared on the porch with his eldest son, now 15 and already showing signs of his grandfather's gift with horses. "We are heading out to check the north pasture," Vernon said. "Wanted to wish you both a happy anniversary before we go." "Thank you, son," Noah said, pride evident in his voice. "Be careful out there." After they left, Penelope leaned her head on Noah's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body beside hers. "We did well," she said softly. "With Vernon, with all our children. They are good people." "We did very well," Noah agreed. "They learned the language of hearts. That is the most important lesson we could teach." Eventually, they retired for the night, both moving more slowly than they once had but still comfortable in the familiar rhythms of preparing for bed together. As Penelope settled into Noah's arms, the position they had slept in for 40 years, she felt complete peace. She had learned to love, truly and deeply, in ways she never imagined possible. She had built a life of meaning and purpose, created a family that would carry forward the lessons she and Noah had learned together. She had no regrets, no wishes for different choices, only gratitude for every moment. "Thank you for teaching me," she whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for learning," Noah replied, his lips brushing her forehead. "Thank you for 40 years of partnership and love and building something beautiful together." "I would do it all again," Penelope said. "So would I," Noah agreed. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it led to this, to us, to the life we created. I would not change a single thing. They drifted into sleep together, secure in their love and the legacy they had built, knowing that whatever time they had left would be spent exactly as they wanted, together, speaking the language of hearts they had learned from each other. The ranch thrived under Vernon's management, combining traditional methods with new innovations that kept them competitive in a changing market. The Harrison name became synonymous with quality horses and ethical business practices throughout Utah Territory and beyond. Penelope and Noah gradually stepped back from daily operations, content to advise when asked, but trusting their children to make their own decisions and learn from their own mistakes. They spent their days in quiet pursuits. Noah still worked with a few special horses, and Penelope kept detailed journals documenting the ranch's history and the family's story. She wrote about the day she arrived in Salt Lake City, about learning to love with Noah as her teacher, about building a life from the ruins of her uncle's abandoned house. She wrote for their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, wanting them to know that love was not something you found, but something you built, carefully and patiently, through thousands of small choices and commitments. On a crisp October morning, exactly 50 years after Penelope had stepped off that stagecoach and into Noah's life, they celebrated their golden anniversary with a gathering that brought together 3 generations of Harrisons and the community they had helped build. The party was held at the ranch, with tables set up across the lawn and enough food to feed half of Salt Lake City. Penelope wore a golden dress that Grace had helped her select, and Noah wore his best suit, still uncomfortable in formal clothing but willing to endure it for such an occasion. Their children and grandchildren took turns sharing stories and toasts, speaking about the lessons they had learned from watching their parents and grandparents build a life together. Vernon spoke about partnership and respect. Elizabeth talked about the importance of choosing someone who challenged you to be better. The grandchildren shared memories of quiet wisdom and patient teaching. When it was finally Penelope's turn to speak, she stood beside Noah, his hand steady in hers, and looked out at the faces gathered before her. 50 years ago, I did not know how to love, she said clearly. I thought I was broken, incapable of the deep feelings that everyone else seemed to experience so easily. I came west expecting nothing, planning to sell my inheritance and return to Boston as quickly as possible. She paused, looking at Noah, seeing in his weathered face the young man who had carried her to safety, who had offered her shelter, who had patiently taught her a new language. But I met a rancher who became my teacher in the language of hearts, she continued, who showed me that love was not something you felt in a single dramatic moment, but something you built through patience and communication and daily commitment. Who taught me that I was not broken, but simply waiting for the right person and the right place to discover what I was truly capable of feeling. Tears tracked down her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. Everything good in my life started with Noah believing in me when I could not believe in myself. This family, this ranch, this community, all of it grew from the foundation we built together. That is my legacy and my greatest joy. Not what I accomplished alone, but what we created through partnership and love. Noah stood and pulled her close, and the assembled crowd erupted in applause and cheers. They kissed, unconcerned with propriety or public display, speaking volumes in the gesture about 50 years of love and partnership. The celebration continued into the evening, with music and dancing and storytelling. Penelope danced with Noah, despite his protests that his knees were not what they used to be, moving slowly to music provided by grandchildren who had inherited talents from both sides of the family. As the sun set and guests began departing, Penelope found herself on the porch with Noah, right where their story had truly begun all those years ago. 50 years, Noah mused. I never imagined living this long, much less being this happy. We were lucky, Penelope said. Lucky to find each other, lucky to have the courage to build something together, lucky to have been given so much time. Not just luck, Noah corrected. We worked for this, Penelope. Every day, in 1,000 small ways, we chose each other and chose this life. That is not luck. That is commitment. Penelope leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. I love you, she said. I have loved you for 50 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left. And I love you, Noah replied. You taught me that broken things can be made whole, that it is never too late to start over, that love is worth the risk of being hurt. They sat together as stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed every stage of their journey. Penelope thought about the scared woman who had arrived in Salt Lake City so long ago, certain she could not love, and marveled at the transformation that had occurred. She had learned to speak the language of hearts, and in doing so, she had discovered her true self. She had built a life of meaning and purpose, created a family that would carry forward the lessons she and Noah had learned together, left a legacy of love that would outlast them both. As they finally retired for the night, both moving slowly but still together, Penelope felt overwhelming gratitude for every moment. The challenges had made them stronger, the joys had made them richer, and through it all, they had faced everything side by side. In bed, Noah held her as he had for 50 years, and Penelope closed her eyes, content in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she belonged with, having lived fully and loved deeply. Thank you, she whispered one more time. For what? Noah asked, though he must have known. For everything, Penelope said. For teaching me the language of hearts, for being patient while I learned, for 50 years of partnership and love and building something beautiful together. For showing me that I was capable of so much more than I ever imagined. Thank you for being willing to learn, Noah replied, his voice soft with sleep and emotion. Thank you for choosing this life, for choosing me, for creating a family I never thought I deserved. Thank you for 50 years of being my partner, my love, my home." They drifted into sleep together, secure in their love and the life they had built, knowing that whatever time remained would be spent exactly as they wanted. Together, speaking the language of hearts they had learned from each other, surrounded by the legacy they had created. The ranch would continue after them, managed by Vernon and eventually his children. The lessons they had taught would carry forward through generations. The love they had built would echo through time, evidence that even those who think themselves incapable can learn, can grow, can create something beautiful if given the right teacher and the courage to try. Penelope Turner Harrison fell asleep in her husband's arms, 50 years after arriving in Salt Lake City, expecting nothing and finding everything. Content in the knowledge that she had lived fully and loved deeply, and left the world better than she found it. And that, she thought as sleep claimed her, was the best possible ending to any love story.